Good morning, everybody. So we're going to start the webinar today. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Christelle Wren, and I'm the CMO here at HRLocker. And today's webinar, we will be talking about contractors or employees. So we'll be talking around the different compliance facts that HR need to know, and just things that are kind of happening at the moment that may affect people's decisions in regards to whether they decide on contractors or employees. We're delighted to have GHR Consulting on the webinar this month with us. So we have Ruairi Guckian, who will be chatting to us about the legal implications of contractors in your organizations. So any rights that they may have, any entitlements. And then I will go through really quickly just how to actually set up contractors in HRLocker and how to set up their contract end dates and things like that. As always, this is a live webinar, so we do have the lovely Jenny with us today, who will be monitoring the questions and answers section. So during the webinar, if you think about anything, if you have any questions for Ruairi, please put it into the questions in the Q&A section, and we'll definitely go through your answers. And I'll ask Ruairi, and Ruairi can give you any questions, or he may be more appropriate to set up a call at the end, whatever suits. So Ruairi, we're delighted to have you with us today. If you want to give a quick introduction, I suppose, of GHR Consulting and your own background.
Yeah, thanks very much, Christelle, for having me. So my name is Ruairi Guckian. I'm based in Galway in the west of Ireland. I've a HR consultancy for the past couple of years. So I've about 12 years experience in HR prior to this. A lot of it internationally. In Australia, I worked in London on the Crossrail project for about 4 years. And I worked in Dubarry, which is based in the west of Ireland, and they've an international operation. So I would have a lot of EU and American employment law. So about 2 years ago, I set up my own consultancy in Galway, and I deal with probably about 30 clients, some on retainer, some on a one-off basis, and provide all sorts of HR help, be it everything from employment contracts to policies to performance management to to recruitment and just the general day-to-day issues which come up from the HR side of things. So yeah, obviously today's topic is very topical. Contractors versus employees and the different options available to employers. So yeah, I'll just be asked by Christelle and the team to hopefully add something to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Ruairi. So I suppose the best starting point that I think we should go with is kind of, I suppose, the main differences. So I'll be controlling the slides, Ruairi. So when you need me to turn a slide, just let me know. And I
Sure. So I don't want to bore people by getting into all of the various differences, but there are a couple of probably legal terms that people need to be conscious of. So a contract of employment, basically an employee, is a contract of service, while a contract for service is what an independent consultant or self-employed contractor would be. So if the WRC is looking at this and determining if someone's an employee versus a contractor, normally they would say you, the employer, will control how, when and where the work is carried out. The employee would supply labour only, or the worker would supply the labour only. You'd pay them a fixed hourly or weekly or monthly wage. They can't subcontract the work or substitute somebody in to do the work for them. You, the employer, would supply the materials. You'd provide the equipment. The worker isn't exposed to personal financial risk of carrying out the work. They don't assume any responsibility for investment in the work or the business. They cannot profit from the management or scheduling or performance of the work. And you, the employer, sets the hours. So that's really what would determine what an employee is. If you're determining if somebody is a contractor, generally they own the business, so it'd probably be a limited company or an umbrella company. They are exposed to the financial risk, so they bear the cost of redoing faulty work. They assume responsibility for investment and managing the project, and they can profit from the management or scheduling or performance of the work. And they have control over what they do and when and how they do it. And they're free to hire other people on their terms to do the work which has been agreed. They provide the materials for the job and the equipment for the job, and basically cost and agree a price for the job, and they control the working hours. So there's the kind of main differences between if someone is an employee versus if someone is regarded as a contractor.
Okay.
So I'm going to flick on to the next slide there, Christelle. So what I suppose are the main benefits of to contractors? So they can often attract better rates than their full-time equivalents. When I worked in London in Crosstrail, probably 50% of the people I was hiring there were contractors that come in on very high day rates and were earning substantially more than employees. They've greater flexibility, so they can kind of follow the work as such. So this is particularly true, you see, with IT contractors. They'd often go from one IT project to another. And again, it probably keeps them motivated because they have something new every 3 or 6 months, depending on the length of the contract. So there's huge flexibility. And it also offers better tax and pension planning opportunity because they can organize their tax in such a way that they pay obviously a lower rate than employee, and that's where the main benefit to them is. The benefits to the employee, Christelle, on the next slide, or the benefits to the employer rather of taking on a contractor is there's much more flexibility for the employer in scaling up. So you might just need somebody for a particular project, or you know, you're not sure how many hours per week or per month you're going to have for a particular consultant. So rather than take on an employee on a fixed term contract or permanent contract, you can actually just hire a consultant without being subject to all the employment law that comes with it, you know, such as guaranteed breaks and hours and benefits and stuff. It's basically a cheaper way of hiring, given there's no requirement to offer company benefits. There's no need to pay employers PRSI. So the benefits to the employer, obviously, I mean, the PRSI is anywhere between 8.8 to 11%. So there's definitely a cost saving there. So it's just easier to scale up if it's only for a short-term project that you potentially need a worker. So when you're trying to determine the difference between the two of them, as I said, the legal difference is the contract of service versus contract for service. So if the WRC is trying to look at if it's an employee versus a contractor, I mean, the most famous recent case was from September 2019, where someone had been working as a contractor for 16 years. They took a case, and basically the adjudicator, it wasn't clear whether they were an employee or a contractor. So he did a test. So the test boiled down to, was there a contract of service or a contract for a service? Regarding pay, was the person paid every month or did they send in an invoice? Taxation, did the worker pay their own VAT or did they pay their own tax? Was there a mutuality of obligation, which means did the employer have to provide work, and did the worker have to turn up for work, or could he substitute somebody else in for him? Did the worker have total control, or did the employer control all of the working day? Integration. So was the worker, you know, did he have an employer email address? Did he wear a uniform? You know, did he go to the Christmas parties? It was bizarre when I was in Crosstrail in London. You know, half the consultants were terrified. They didn't want anything to do, and the employer was almost the same. They didn't want to be inviting a lot of the consultants to the Christmas party because, you know, they didn't want to be seen to be showing them as employees versus consultants. So some people take it very seriously. And the final test is, are they in the business of their own accounts? So have they their own, you know, phone and stuff like that, transport to work tools. So it's definitely very topical now. You see a lot of drivers. There's a big case regarding the Uber drivers in London in the past couple of months in the Supreme Court there. So I think over the next few years, it's going to become a much more topical thing in Ireland.
Yeah. Ruairi, what about, you know, in the UK, obviously they have the IR35. Do you think that'll affect us in Ireland in the future? Yeah,
like we generally kind of tend to follow a lot of the UK compliance. So just for people who aren't aware, the IR35 it's basically a tax on contractors. It's like a payroll tax for contractors. So when I worked in London, I left there 2013. A lot of the contractors, they could decide themselves whether they were self-employed or an employee. With the new rules in the IR35, which came into effect a few weeks ago in the UK, it's actually up to the larger companies in the public sector. They actually have to make the decision whether the worker is an employee or a contractor. When this probably will come into Ireland, usually they'll follow the money. So if the government feels that they're kind of being ripped off by a lot of bogus bogus self-employment, or disguised employment, I think, as they call it. That's probably what will bring maybe a bit more scrutiny onto the gig economy workers in Ireland. So yeah, I can definitely see over the next few years the Irish government will probably see if the UK are making a lot more money from clamping down on disguised employment, they might start doing something similar here.
Yeah, and then you've gone through the ruling that was looked at. Is there a specific test that people can look at in regards to deciding is the person an employee or a contractor, or do you just kind of go through those sets of questions that we just went through?
I mean, there's no legal definition of self-employment or that. So, I mean, usually it comes down to a test. In most cases, it's fairly clear. In that case I mentioned there, it wasn't clear, where, some case you could argue the worker may have been getting paid through the payroll tax, but, he had his own transport and he set his own hours. So, I mean, a good example is probably myself. I worked in Dubai for 4 years as an employee, and I was brought back probably a year and a half later to work as a consultant for them. But it's a totally different relationship now. I set my own hours. I work kind of at will. I provide my own tools, my own equipment, my own laptop. It's not a thing where, I need to be there 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It's a totally different relationship. So that's probably a good example, really, of the difference between the two of them. But there's no one kind of there's no one definitive rule that would set you apart.
I suppose that kind of leads nicely into another question that I have for you, Rory, if that's okay, is so if at the moment, we're in this kind of COVID space of people deciding whether they're going to be bringing people back off the, offices are opening, restaurants and things are opening at the moment, and they're bringing people back, and hopefully for a lot of companies, they're able to bring everybody back off the PUP scheme and back into employment. For those people who maybe are looking at, well, I can't bring this person back to full-time employment, maybe I'm only going to bring them back on a contract way instead. Is that an option for companies, or if they let go?
The general rule of thumb would be if they'd previously been an employee, it'd be very difficult to make them redundant and bring them back doing the same role as a contractor. I mean, what I'd probably advise in that situation, I mean, obviously the hospitality industry has had a terrible time of it, similar to a lot of other industries, but particularly the hospitality industry. So, I mean, often it's easier to bring someone in on a fixed term contract. So if they're opening up, the start of May, for example, you might bring them in a fixed term contract until the end of September. So bring them in for 4 or 5 months. Obviously, they'd have the same employee rights as full-time employees, but that's maybe a good way to bring them back. If you bring them back as a contractor to the same job they've been doing previously, I mean, it would be very easy for them potentially to take a case to argue that they should be an employee, and they're due their rights, annual leave, sick pay, stuff like that. So it wouldn't be advisable is my answer.
And so just you touched there briefly on the fixed term contract side of it. So if you can maybe go through exactly the difference between if I'm hiring somebody and I'm putting them on a fixed term contract, or if I'm just hiring a contractor, what is the main difference?
So a fixed term contract, the employee still has all of the employee benefits. They just have an end date to their contract. So really they're not treated any differently to any of your other employees. So they'd still be entitled to maternity leave, annual leave, public holidays, all of the benefits, the minimum working wage, the working, the maximum working hours. They'd be entitled to, the breaks after 6 hours work, that type of thing. Whereas a contractor really doesn't have any of those rights, other than, a right to work in a safe environment and the right to work, the right to data protection, that type of thing. I mean, a contractor has no claim on annual leave, has no claim on benefits, has no claim on public holidays, maternity leave, paternity. It kind of takes all that, I suppose, hassle, for want of a better word, away from the employer. About that, Rory. Sorry. yeah. So like, to answer the question, I mean, a contractor really has, they kind of agree a fee for a particular project or a length of time or their service, and outside of that, there's nothing to really stop the employer, ending the contract at will.
What about, we got a question in earlier, Rory, in regards to if you gave a consultant a job title. So I'll actually just read the question out to make sure that I'm saying it properly, if that's okay. Is if you give a consultant a title, does that imply employee status? As an example, IT systems manager, for example, does that mean that they are actually, is that an employment?
In a word, no, but it will be taken as part of probably a bigger test, which I kind of ran through earlier. So to give an example, I'd be the HR manager. One of my clients has set me up as a HR manager for his company and has given me an email address. But outside of that, there is no way I could be construed as an employee. I work for lots of other clients. I work kind of at my own time, and he doesn't set the hours, and it's my own equipment. And I can provide a substitute if required. I suppose my advice in that case would be if the employer is slightly concerned that maybe they seem to be ticking an awful lot of the kind of the boxes, then it wouldn't be advised to be doing. But if that's the only kind of crossover into employment territory, I wouldn't be too concerned about it.
Okay, we'll just pop over to your next slide there if you want to.
Yeah, so look, I'll send these around afterwards. This is just a brief kind of, I suppose, overview of employment rights for your employees, your fixed term employees and contractors. And look, as you can see there, there's practically no difference between the employment rights for permanent employees versus fixed term employees. But obviously with the contractors, you can see a lot of the excess there. So they really, they like it, they take the risks, they're generally better rewarded for it. But they take the risk, if they're sick. I remember in Crosstrail, people, hated the bank holiday weekends because they were losing out on the day's pay. I remember there was a couple of 4-day weekends back to back around the time Prince William got married, and all the employees were absolutely loving it, and all the contractors were raging because they missed out on about 4 days pay across a 10-day period. So it's some people love it. It's not for everyone. Some people like the security of knowing that they're going to get paid every week, and some people are happy to take the risk for potentially earn a bit of extra money and look after their own tax arrangements.
Yeah. Rory, what I'm going to do now quickly is I'm just going to go into HRLocker real quick just to show people how they can set up both fixed term contracts and contractors. And in the meantime, if anybody has any questions, please post them into the Q&A section. They should be on the top right there. And we'll get back to the questions then after. I'll just show the system for just 1 second. This will all go wrong when I'm changing screens. So in HRLocker, obviously, we have a number of people who, in most companies, you would have a number of people who are using both contractors as well as fixed term contracts. And in HRLocker, there are a number of ways that you can set people up as well, just really to look at, to have their employment details, as if they're on fixed term contract, if they're contractors, to have any of their contact details. And then also you can put in any kind of if you need them to be clocking project hours or timesheets or anything like that, you can do that within the system. So I'll just kind of go through, first of all, the easiest way for somebody to be setting up on a fixed term contract is here in the directory. And when you're adding an employee, actually I won't add an employee, I will go into this person over here. So I've added this employee here, and after you add the employee, the terms of employment will come up on the screen here. Very simple. You're just going to choose what kind of contract they're on. So for the fixed term contract, which is here, you'll see that then you kind of put in whether they're direct or indirect, how many contract hours they have, what's their full-time equivalent. So if they're on a fixed term contract, are they on maybe 20 hours a week instead of 40? So are they? So you'd be putting in 0.5 there. So that's their full-time equivalent. Excuse me. And then the most important thing for the fixed term contract is the end date. So what the end date does is, excuse me, I'm putting in a 0. What the end date does is once the end date comes into the system will automatically lock that person out of the system unless you change the end date. And a couple of important things to put in here is when you put in the end date here, if this person's on a fixed term contract, you can put in a reminder. So when do you want to be actually reminded when this person's contract is up for renewal? Is it something that you want to be reminded in a month's time or a week's time? You can set your own parameters around that. And we'll talk to Rory in a second about in regards to how do you deal with rolling fixed term contracts and what's the legalities around that. But that's important. And then the next thing here is the email CCC, which again is important. And what this is in regards to if somebody is leaving, and you put in that end date, who needs to know that that person is leaving? So it kind of creates your workflow then if maybe somebody in payroll needs to know, or in HR, or the manager, or anything like that. That's important. If it's even facilities in regards to, they need to know that this person is leaving so that they can get their keys back or fobs or anything like that. So you can put all the email addresses there that they need to. So that's how you put in the fixed term contract. Obviously, you can also put in the probation period. And exactly like Rory said, is that this person is a regular employee, so it needs to be treated like a regular employee. If there's probation period in place, make sure you're putting in the date when you want to be notified about the probation as well. I'm repeating what Rory said there, is that really important that this person who is on this contract is treated like a regular employee, and so the same, your handbooks and your policies and procedures and things like that will also apply, and you can have them all set up here in your HR doc section. So then when you're setting up an actual contractor, the main reason why people like to put contractors inside HRLocker is that they can start to clock hours against the different projects that they're currently working on. So you can see exactly how many hours they're working on, what projects that they're putting on as well. And also you can manage that contract end date as well. So if you've actually physically signed that this person is going to be working on a 3-month project, so you can see how long that person's been with you. A couple of different things that people do. It's really up to yourself. So you'd go into the offices here. A lot of people would create an absolutely separate office for a contractor's office. So you'd create an office here, and once you've created the office, I'll just give you a option. So maybe this is for your contractors. I'll just choose any time zone there. Okay. And there's a couple of things that are really important to decide with your contractor's office. And exactly like Rory just said there a second ago, is that, okay, so presumably these contractors will not be getting public holidays, so you won't be putting in public holidays. In terms of leave, they may be able to put in block out days so that they're not available to work, but obviously you're not going to be giving them any annual leave entitlement. So that's really important. And maybe you don't want other people to be able to see these people, so you can tick that box so people can't see them. And more than likely, time off in lieu or anything like that, or there'd be no carryover policy because they don't have any annual leave, exactly like Rory said. So important when you're setting up that contractor's office to make sure you have that time off section set, that there is no annual leave policy for them. But a nice way to kind of get contractors just to have an overview in regards to what they're actually working on is in the time on section. They can put in log their hours, so you don't have to put them on a fixed work pattern that it's 9 to 5, because as Rory said, this person controls their own hours, but they can just log in the different hours that they've worked. But most importantly, they can log the different hours they've spent on each project that they're working on you with. So then, at the end of the contract, or at the end of when you're reviewing the contract, you'll be able to have a lovely overview to be able to see, okay, well, this is the amount of hours spent in each project. And the other very nice thing is you can put a cost against each of these projects as well, so you can report out on how much time and how much money was actually allocated in each project. So for example, when I go into the project here, let's have a look at this admin one here. And when I go into assign, you can see that there's a charge per hour. And I can have that different for every single employee, for every single contractor and employee. So say, for example, on a contractor, they could be charged at 200 euros an hour, this person here, and this other person could be charged at 150 euros an hour. So just a nice thing. Obviously, you can pull down reports on that. So there's a couple of questions that have come in. So that's really the overview in regards to HRLocker. Really important that if anybody wants to talk with myself or anybody here in the team, that we can go through exactly how to set that up with you if you have any questions on that. And then also, I'm just going to ask Jenny to put in the link to, if you want to, there's a couple of new people here on the webinar, if you want to put in the demo link there, Jenny, and if anybody wants to start a trial, and one of our team here will contact you just to go through what exactly you're looking for, what's your business problem, and how we can help you, and that's the key. So Rory, I think it's over to you again, because there's a number of questions that are coming in. So the first question I have here is, which I think I have the answer for, is do you have a checklist to differentiate between an employee versus contractor? So I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's
So I'll send that around as a PDF afterwards. No problem. Yeah.
that's perfect. So what is the liability for employers who engage casual labour with flexible hours/days, depending on the requirement of the business? Do you want to read that out again, Henry?
Yeah. So I mean, to be honest, like 0-hour contracts aren't supposed to be used in Ireland. The reality is, especially in hospitality, a lot of clients I'd be dealing with wouldn't be given a definitive number of hours to their employees. There was a new rule brought in the past couple of years where employees could actually ban their hours based on the previous 12 months employment. So I think there was 6 different bans. So if, for example, someone had been working an average of 20 hours a week, that would effectively be the band that they'd be in. So if the employer started dropping them below their average number of hours, they could basically bring a case to say that they wanted to be in that band, so that the employer had to kind of commit to giving them a similar amount of hours going forward. The reality is an awful lot of businesses do this. They don't give a set amount of hours to their employees, so it is kind of it's another way of kind of operating a 0 hours contract, but it's more common than you'd think.
Okay. And just to be clear, in terms of the 0-hour contracts, that is a thing of the past at this stage, right?
Yeah.
So what would the rules be around doing performance reviews with contractors?
It's totally at your own discretion. It's a totally different relationship with the contractor versus an employee. I mean, even with an employee, you don't have to do reviews. It just means if you have a poorly performing employee, it can be very difficult to get rid of them unless you follow the process and procedure you set out in your policies. If you have a contractor who's not performing, you just shake their hand and wish them all the best, and that's the end of it. So to be honest, you've far more flexibility with the performance review. So with contractors and Crosstrail, again, we would do a performance review every year, and they'd usually ask for a few extra quid, but that's fairly standard. But it's totally at your own discretion. I would say if you're happy with their performance and you don't want to pay them any extra, just leave them doing what they're doing.
What about, Ruairi? I mentioned it briefly there in terms of the rolling fixed term contracts. So I've had somebody for 3 1-year contracts on a fixed term contract. What's the legal implication of that?
So there is a maximum. There is a maximum of fixed term contract. You can't have someone indefinitely on a fixed term contract. Normally it's up to a maximum of 2 years, I think. I need to double check that. In the HSE, they actually put people on fixed term contracts. So I know my wife was on one for 4 years, and it's terrible for people because they know they're going to be there permanently. And it affects people getting mortgages and stuff like that. If you're in a fixed term contract, generally speaking, it's very difficult for people to kind of plan for the future and stuff like that if they're getting a mortgage. You can't have people on fixed term contracts indefinitely. So normally at the end of a fixed term contract, if you don't end it, normally you're supposed to give a month's notice. If you don't end it, or give them some notification that the fixed term contract has come to an end, then it basically, the position turns into a permanent position. You can't kind of turn around a month or two at the end of the fixed term contract has passed and then say, oh, well, actually, your fixed term contract is over. It kind of turns into a permanent contract if you don't end it. So that's why an HRLocker is handy with having the end dates. Because you need to be on top of it, and there are cases where people forget about it and then they decide actually they want to get rid of the person who was on the fixed term contract, but the end date has passed 2 or 3 months ago and the kind of ship has sailed to a certain degree.
Yeah, and I think that's important as well. If another question for you, Rory, if employers have contractors working in the EU countries, who has jurisdiction around that?
So if the contractor is based in the EU, the jurisdiction will be around the country they're working in. So the general rule of thumb would be that they should be paying tax within the country where they're doing the work. I mean, the IR35 is, I'd have a lot of experience with EU employment law, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden. I mean, the IR35 kind of came from German and Dutch law, so it's even stricter over there regarding disguised employment and if someone is an employee versus a contractor. So my advice would be you'd want to see which you'd need to see which country it is, and really you'd probably need to get specific tax advice from that country, because if it's not an employee situation, you're basically talking about a tax situation within that specific country, and you just basically want to make sure that you're not going to get stung, you know, a year or two down the line for I mean, some of the equivalent of social security tax. I mean, in Sweden, I think it was it 37%, similar in Denmark. In Germany, it was 28%. So in Ireland, it's, you know, is a 11% PRSI. In some of the European countries, it's a massive difference. So if you're going to get stung for that after a year or two, it's going to knock a serious chunk out of your budget. So it's not relatively small figures like you'd probably argue Ireland is.
And I think, but correct me if I'm wrong, Rory, it's becoming a little bit easier to find contractors in terms of we've got Upwork and Bark.com and things like that. I mean, there are dedicated places to actually go and find contractors.
Yeah, look, it's definitely become a lot easier. I mean, hypothetically, if you're looking for, you know, a HR consultant in Galway, you can go to Bark.com, put in HR consultant, type in location, or just leave it at Ireland, and anybody registered on that, any consultant, will have the opportunity up to a maximum of 5 to come back to you with the proposal of what you're after. Same for designers, same for everything you can think of. And I mean, they call it the gig economy, but it's definitely grown in Ireland. So I can see it growing further for the next few years, but it'll probably get to a stage where the government realizes that maybe, you know, they're losing out on a few billion a year, especially if the potential tax increases, you know, Joe Biden is talking about bringing in, puts a bit of more pressure on the finances. They might say, well, look, we're missing out here, we need to clamp down on this. But yeah, look, there's very easy ways now. Bark.com is probably a great one. If you want to find a consultant, you shouldn't have any issues, and be able to compare them rather than just find one. Actually be able to compare and get 4 or 5 quotes to match your needs.
Yeah, and we actually recently we had Q Agency on their consultancy. There's a number of these out there that if you're looking for contractors in foreign countries, that they're able to help you with that, because it is a mindful. You don't know, you know, none of us are au fait with everything. So I have another question here, but I think it's a lead on to the previous question, Rory, is can you expand on what the financial risk would be for a contractor, employer versus contractor? Checklist is not specific. So
the financial risk is basically if the contractor brings a case to the WRC and ultimately the Labour Court, and they find that all through those years of work they actually should have been an employee rather than a contractor. They would then basically do a calculation as to how much annual leave is owed, how much PRSI should have been paid, how many public holidays should have been paid, any other benefits, you know, was every other employee of the business getting pension contributions? So would that need to be factored in as well? So it's not just a case of the employer giving the worker a contract to say you're self-employed and you're not entitled to any benefits. I mean, that in theory doesn't really stand for much if an adjudicator looks at the case and sees that for all intents and purposes they were an employee. You know, they do the test and they're kind of ticking 6 or 7 of the 8 kind of criteria. So the liability potentially is big if the contractor has been there a long time. Yeah, I mean, they'd be entitled to get all their benefits backdated.
And I mean, I presume, Rory, the risk then that you're talking about, it lies with the employer.
Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly not aware. I'm sure there are some cases where the employer is fighting to argue that someone is an employee rather than a contractor, but it's usually the other way around, where they're happy with the status quo, and it's usually maybe a disgruntled contractor who realizes that, you know what, I actually should be an employee, because they realize that the other guys are getting, you know, good pension contributions or healthcare, or they're getting paid public holidays, and, you know, they might leave the company and take a case then afterwards, which is quite common as well.
So, I mean, what impact do you think, you know, we've all heard about the Uber ruling in the UK. Do you think that will affect us here as well, in terms of, I know the Deliveroo is there, in terms of just drivers specifically. Do you think that we're next, as in it's coming down here as well?
Yeah, I mean, the big one with Uber, where they basically classified, the Supreme Court in the UK classified the drivers as employees rather than than contractors. You know, I think the Uber share price dropped about 10% overnight after that. But I mean, there was a case even in Ireland in December 2019 with Domino's Pizza. The delivery drivers, they took a case to the High Court, and they actually won as well. The you know, they were talked about, was there a mutuality of obligation, was there integration into the business, and they found, you know, there was. So there are similar cases in Ireland as well, and because with the COVID pandemic, especially in the hospitality now around drivers, yeah, I can see a lot more cases in the next few years regarding that. So it's definitely going to be more topical. So if people have a lot of drivers and they think they're self-employed, they probably need to double check and have a good think about, well, you know, what more they can do to kind of protect their business so that they're not caught in future years, is to have a backdated say actually they were an employee, so you need to pay up.
Yeah. Now I have 2 more questions here, but can subcontractors work they don't get internally covered when out of the business? So can subcontractors work but they don't internally get covered? I wonder, could you pose that question again, Rory? Unless do you?
Sorry.
Can subcontractors work but don't internally
covered when out of the business?
Maybe you can post that question again, and we'll go back because I'm just not exactly clear. So we'll go to the next one. There is, do fixed term contractors accrue annual leave or sick leave, bank holidays, etc.?
So fixed term employees do.
Yes.
Yeah. Fixed term employees.
Fixed term contractors.
Fixed term contractors. Pretty much no.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. A fixed term employee is pretty much the exact same rights as a permanent employee. They accrue public holidays, they accrue everything else, annual leave. They're allowed paternity leave, maternity leave, etc., parents leave, parental leave. But fixed term contractors, no, they've pretty much no rights. And to be honest, if you hire someone on a contract basis, it's still quite easy. I mean, depending on the contract you've with them, to finish it up if they're not performing.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is that to kind of, I suppose, not think of the fixed term bit, but to put in as contractor or employee. Just because they're a fixed term employee, they're a regular employee, right? They have, everything is the same. Contractors, fixed term contractor, the other side, different terms of contract. So I think the question here is, which you've covered, Rory, which I think is important, is that if a contractor is working for a number of different companies, that's important, isn't it, in terms of proving that the person is not an employee?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so that's one of the kind of key things, that there's no mutuality of obligation, so that they're not obliged to give them work, and they can work for other businesses as well. Yeah, that's kind of a key one, really. I mean, if you're shown that you're working for 2 or 3 or 4 other clients, it's very hard, you know, especially in you're setting your own hours, you know, you're providing your own tools. It'd be very hard to argue that that's an employer situation. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. I think this is going together, is, and she's just resent the question there, so thank you, is if you are a contractor, but when you're out of the business, you do not subcontract your work. It's just put on hold. Would this final point apply in regards to that? I presume so. Like if they don't cover the business with subcontractors and they've gone off working somewhere else, where they're still a contractor. Well,
one of the things that defines an employee versus a subcontractor is, can you provide a substitute? Okay, so for an employee, you can't. I mean, you know, Chriselle, you couldn't just not turn up for work this morning and say, it's all right, my friend's going to cover the webinar for me. No problem.
I tried, didn't work.
But I mean, if you're a contractor, you know, you could probably, like, if I'm a consultant, you know, and I had a HR piece of work to do, I could probably send in, you know, one of the consultants and get them to do it. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I mean, you don't necessarily need to subcontract the work out. It might be a thing that, you know, it goes on hold for 4 weeks or 4 months or whatever the circumstances are, and then the person comes back to finish the project. I think that's what the question is. I'm not.
Yeah, no, I think but actually what might be a benefit, we'll obviously have Rory's details, but as always, we're going to be sending out the webinar to everybody, and Rory's details will be there. So if anybody would like to, and obviously on bark.com, if anybody would like to get in contact with Rory, if the person who asked that question, if they actually just want to I'll give their details to Rory, and Rory, maybe you might reach out just to kind of clarify exactly the question. And then the last question here, which I think has been answered in the chat, is if somebody is being brought to court in regards to that somebody's claiming that they were employee, is it capped, or how long they can go back? And my understanding is that it's unlimited, is it?
If it goes to court, my understanding is it'll be unlimited. If it's unfair dismissals, it's usually capped at 2 years. But if it goes to so that particular case, the court, the employee had worked there, for 16 years, so they were looking for claims for 16 years of backdated. Yeah. So I don't know what the cap is in High Court or Circuit Court, but yeah, it's a lot more than 2 years.
It's on, yeah, that was my understanding as well. So I think that's just a double check. I think that's the last of the questions there. So thank you so much, Rory. I hope everybody found that really helpful. Just to recap real quick is we'll also be holding another webinar in regards to just specific UK legislation in regards to the recent Uber ruling, how it will affect and things like that. And so we'll be sending out details of that in the next few weeks if somebody would like to have just that a little bit more specific in regards to the UK legislation. And obviously, Rory would be delighted to chat to anybody, to go through any questions they may have. If it's, if you need help in regards to doing some of your contracts or anything like that, he's always there to chat in regards to asking any questions. So thank you, everybody, so much. I hope you all enjoyed it. And thank you, Rory. We're delighted to have you here and hope we have you back on again. So thanks, everybody, and take care.